Hey guys, welcome to our math lesson. Let's go ahead and let's get started by reading our learning target. I can measure the length of an object by choosing and using appropriate tools. So let's talk about a couple of words in here because we need to know those words and able to meet our learning target. So let's start by looking at the word measure. Remember, measure means to find the length, the height, or the weight of an object, okay? One thing that we can measure is the length of an object. Length is a measurement that tells the distance from one point to another or how long something is. Okay? Then we talked about that word units. Units is the part that is used to measure. Each part for one kind of unit has the same length. So remember we've talked about that with inches and centimeters. They are two types of units. And they're both different, right? So centimeters are small. They're like the length of our pinky. And inches are a little bit larger than that. They're like the length of the quarter, okay? So when we talk about those units, we're talking about the thing that we're measuring in, okay? What we can compare that object to. So remember inches, we can also say that 12 inches equals 1 foot. Remember we talked about an inch being shown on a ruler. A ruler is a measuring stick that is marked in inches and centimeters. So there are 12 inches on a ruler or 30 centimeters. And let's talk about that word centimeters. Centimeters is also a unit of length. It is smaller. And centimeters, we talk about meters with. So there are 100 centimeters in 1 meters. Okay? Now we talked about feet a little bit just a minute ago, and we talked about it a little bit on yesterday. So remember 12 inches equals 1 foot. And then when we have more than 1 foot, we have to change that to the plural feet, okay? All right, so then 3 feet equal 1 yard. And a yard is also a unit of measure for length. So when we look at, when we look at inch, feet, and yards, they all have that unit of inches on there, but the inch is the smallest unit. And then we have feet, which is larger, right? 12 inches equals 1 foot. And then we have yards. So even though they're still measured in inches, those help us to know about the size of objects based on which measurement tool we need. Then we have meters. Meters is about 100 centimeters, okay? So we talked a little bit about these yesterday, how we would use or what tool we would use to measure larger objects, and we're going to continue with that idea today. So let's go ahead, and that comes back to our learning target, choosing and using appropriate tools. So in order to be successful with this learning target, there's a couple things that we need to be able to do. We need to be able to use measuring tools correctly. We need to understand the differences in the measuring tools and the units that they measure in. And then we need to be able to choose the best tool for the object that we're measuring. So I want you to think about my board here, okay? Think about my board. How would we measure this or find out how long this item is to the nearest centimeter? And the nearest means the closest. So how would we measure the length of the board? So what does length mean? Remember, length is how long something is from one point to another. So I want to find out how long it is from this side all the way to this side in centimeters. Okay? So now let's think about what tool would be the most appropriate. So we talked about 2 tools just a minute ago in our introduction. So we have a ruler, which has 30 centimeters on it. And then we have meter sticks, which measures in meters. So think about which tool would be the most appropriate for this, okay? All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and look through some ideas on how we can measure the length of the board, okay? All right, so remember when we're measuring length, we're trying to find the distance from one object or one side to the other, how long it is, okay? So one of the things that this person did was they used a meter stick. This is a meter stick here, okay? Would a meter stick be a more appropriate tool to use than a ruler? Why would a meter stick be more appropriate to measure the board than a ruler? I want you to talk about that with someone. So a ruler is a smaller measuring tool than the meter stick. So when we're trying to measure smaller objects, the ruler would be a more appropriate tool. But when we're trying to measure something larger, that's going to be way bigger than 30 centimeters, the meter stick would be a more appropriate tool. So what they did was they found that the board is going to be more than 1 meter long. So they had to overlap it like we did with our ruler yesterday. So they marked where that 100 centimeters was, and then they put the meter stick underneath it and lined it up with a 0 to measure on again to find the length. You could also use a measuring tape. A measuring tape is another type of measuring tool. And the thing about a measuring tape is it goes on for a lot longer than even a meter or a yardstick does. You can find longer lengths with that. So you hold one end of the measuring tape at the end of the object on 0, and then you go all the way across to find the other length. So I want you to see where our measuring tape ended at the length of the board. Do you see what numbers on that measuring tape? 180. Now let's think back to here when we had these 2 meter sticks. 1 meter stick is 100 centimeters, and then the second meter stick was on 80. So we have 100 and then we have 80. So what is the total length across the board if we take 100 and we take 80 and we add those together? Okay, it's going to be 180, isn't it? So which one was more efficient though? Using the meter sticks or using the measuring tape? Yeah, the measuring tape, it took away, in case we messed up when we were marking our finger and putting that meter stick on, it took that away and it let us just have that one consistent use, okay? All right, so now we're going to go ahead and kind of talk through some questions that will help us. So in the first measure it says, why can you add 180 together to find the length of the whiteboard in centimeters? So why can we do that? I want you to go ahead and pause the video and think about that. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about that now. So we can add together 180 to find the total length of 180 centimeters because we line the second meter stick up at the 0 where the first meter stick ended. Okay? All right, now let's go ahead and let's look at number 2. Longer objects can be measured in meters. 1 meter is about the same as 100 centimeters. A meter stick is 1 meter long. How long is the whiteboard to the nearest meter? Okay, so remember, the nearest means the closest. So if 1 meter stick is 100 meters long, but the length across the whiteboard was 180 centimeters long, would just 1 meter stick help us to find the length of the whole whiteboard, or would we need the second meter stick? We would need 2 meter sticks, right? So we're at 80 on that second one. If we had 20 more centimeters, we would be at 100 centimeters, which would be a full 2 meters. But it is just wanting us to get to that nearest one. So it is about 2 meters long, okay? Why could it be easier to measure a whiteboard with a measuring tape than a meter stick? We just talked about that a little bit before, but I want you to go ahead and think about that yourself now. Why would measuring the whiteboard with a measuring stick be different than the meter stick? Go ahead and pause the video and talk through that. So when we're measuring with the measuring tape, remember, it is one consistent measuring tool, whereas the meter stick only has 100 centimeters on it, right? So if we have something even bigger than that, then the measuring tape would help us to be more, get a closer and more accurate measure, okay? I want you to think back to how you were measuring, okay? So right now what I want us to do is I want us to go ahead and reflect back on our success criteria really quickly. Are we able to use measuring tools correctly? Think about where you start a measuring tool, a ruler, a meter stick, or a measuring tape. Where do all three of those objects have to, or all three of those tools have to start on the object? They all start at the zero, right? If there's not a zero, then we know that it's at the end. So that's important. Now, when we go across the object to the end, what are we looking for at the end? We're looking for that number below that object on the measuring tool, right? So that means that we can measure it or use the measuring tools correctly. Now let's think about knowing the difference between the tools and being able to choose which one is better. So just like we just did, we know that it would not have been appropriate to try to use a ruler to measure this board. Now, if this was the only thing that we had, sure, we could do it. But which one is going to be the best tool? The measuring tape is going to be the best tool, but if we didn't have the measuring tape, then we could have used the meter stick, okay? So that is being able to understand the difference in the measuring tools and the units that they have in order to choose that best tool. So I want you to think about that. Were you successful with that, or do we need to continue practicing, okay? All right, now in our Ready Math journals, we're going to turn over and we're going to kind of think about to this success criteria of being able to think about the different types of measuring tools and the units that they use, okay? All right, so go ahead and turn in your Ready Math book to page 528. All right, so last week we did this with inches and yards or inches and feet, I believe it was. Today we're going to do it with centimeters and meters. So we're going to circle the objects that we would measure with a centimeter ruler. We're going to underline the objects that would be easier to measure with a meter stick, okay? So I want you to go ahead and go through and decide which ones we would measure would be more appropriate to measure with a ruler, which ones would be more appropriate to measure with a meter stick, okay? All right, so let's look. A hot dog. Would a hot dog be more appropriate to measure with a ruler or a meter stick? Which one? Yeah, with a ruler. All right, what about a jump rope? Would a jump rope be more appropriate to measure with a ruler or a meter stick? A meter stick. All right, a pencil. Would it be more appropriate to use a ruler or a meter stick? A meter stick. I'm sorry, a ruler. What about your height? How tall you are? Would it be more appropriate to use a ruler or a meter stick? Yeah, a meter stick. What about your Ready Math book? Would it be more appropriate to use a ruler to measure that or a meter stick? Yeah, a ruler. Now let's look at the items that we circled that we said that we would measure with a ruler. We have a hot dog, a pencil, and a book. What do all three of those objects have in common? Well, we know that we're going to measure them with a ruler to be the most appropriate tool, but what do we know about those three objects? We know that their size is smaller. It is smaller than this ruler, right? All right, well, what about a jump rope and your height? What is the same about those? The size of those. What's the same about the size of those? They're larger than this ruler, right? So when we're measuring smaller things, it's more appropriate to use a ruler. When we're measuring larger things, it's more appropriate to use a different tool like a meter stick or a measuring tape, right? All right, now let's go to number 6, and let's see if you can measure use the measuring tools to measure this key correctly. So we're looking for the nearest centimeter. That means the closest centimeter. Go ahead and measure this key. When you're done, you can go ahead and come back. All right, so let's look. When we're measuring correctly, we start on the 0. We're at the end. This one has a 0, so our object started there. We go all the way across. When we look at the end, it is right past the 5. But remember, we want to know the nearest. So is it closest to the 5 or is it closer to the 6 centimeters? What do you think? Yeah, it's closer to the 5 because it's just a little bit past it. So the key is about 5 centimeters long, okay? Now you're going to measure the length of this ribbon to the nearest meter. So this goes back to being able to use the measuring tools correctly. They have already chosen the best objects for us, right? They chose a ruler for the key because it's smaller, and then they chose the meter stick for the ribbon because it's longer. So they've already chose the most appropriate tool for us, but now I want to see if you can measure correctly with this item. All right, go ahead and pause the video and answer. All right, so they started it on the 0. Now we go all the way across to the end, and we have to find the nearest centimeter. So it's a little bit past 91 centimeters. So is it closer to 91 or is it closer to 92? What do you think? It's closer to 91. So now it wants us to look here. Is this item closer to 1 meter, 3 meters, 90 meters, or 100 meters? How many meters are on a measuring stick? There's 100 centimeters on 1 meter stick. So is this ribbon going to be closer to 1 meter, 30 meters, 90 meters, or 100 meters? It's going to be closer to 1 meter. They tricked us down here with 90 meters and 100 meters because we were looking at that and thinking centimeters. But remember, it wanted to the closest meter, not the closest centimeter. So the length of this ribbon is about 1 meter. All right, guys. I hope that you are working towards meeting those success criteria, and we will continue practicing this so that we can reach that success criteria and be able to do this independently. Bye, guys.